Now let me introduce the senator. Mike Barrett is state senator representing Chelmsford and 8 other communities in Massachusetts. And he serves as the Senate chair of the legislature's Committee on Telecommunications, Utilities, and Energy. This committee's work includes issues like energy, legislation, public utility reform, and virtually all climate-related legislation passes through this committee. So Senator Barrett has been the most prominent supporter of climate legislation in the Senate. So please welcome him.
Thank you, Justice. Thank you, Barrett. Is it okay if I just stand in front?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much for coming. I, like all of you, have been watching what's going on nationally, as well as in Massachusetts and as well as in the towns that I represent. And it can get pretty dizzying, and for me, very stressing. But I've decided that you, those of you who do have serious questions about the way the country is trending, and I have a dual strategy that really makes sense to me. James Carville, who was very prominent in the Obama and the Clinton administrations, has a piece in today's New York Times and suggests that nationally, politicians in my party, the Democratic Party, and citizens who have problems with Mr. Trump should declare a tactical pause, engineer a kind of strategic retreat. And by that he means that he is convinced that there's going to be a lot of overreaching, some of it with tragic consequences on the part of those currently in power in Washington. And so he suggests that of necessity, even though we'd rather not see it, we let these events unfurl a little bit, progress a little bit, and refrain from the impulse to immediately call for marches, call for protests, express the anxiety that we might feel. Carville's advice for politicians who are based in Washington and your representatives who are there, I think may make a lot of sense. The exception, of course, should be the steps that you take locally in Chelmsford or that you want to see out of your state government. It is true that the other party and Mr. Trump control almost everything in our federal government. But the responsibility to govern is bipartisan here in Massachusetts. I work every day with Republicans who care a significant amount about environmental issues and climate issues, just to name others. They also care about education and health care and jobs for people. There's a lot of bipartisanship here, so Carville's advice to take a tactical timeout directed at those who are primarily concerned about events in D.C. isn't the right advice for us. Our job is to continue to do our job because we've got, in a bipartisan way, a responsibility to govern. So my focus, and I think the focus of the legislature, regardless of parties legislators might belong to, is to try to do our job. And I solace myself in a kind of, and I want to talk about the federal piece because it provides context for everything we might do here in Massachusetts. I remind myself that had the federal election gone the other way, the election for president, and had Kamala Harris eked out a narrow win rather than Trump having eked out a narrow win, the country would still be divided. Circumstances today, I think, would be much better, but either way, the country would be divided. A narrow victory for one party, a narrow victory for the other, would have left some fundamental issues still unaddressed. All our work, binding the country together, finding common ground, making sure that no one feels dispossessed or too angry, All that work would have remained even if Harris had won. So while the results did not go my way, and while there are serious implications for climate policy in President Trump's being in power, nevertheless, the important thing for me, and I hope, and for many of us, is to realize that day to day, the job in some respects remains much the same. Do everything you can, of course, to love your family and support the people around you. Carve out a little extra time for your neighborhood or for your town, maybe even a little extra time for issues of statewide importance. That additional space for civic involvement is something that distinguishes Chelmsford. This is a community that's always had a strong sense of place, and this is a moment where we really need that kind of civic idealism and commitment on your parts. I'll tell you what we're doing in Massachusetts, what I was doing today in the State House as we attempt to do our job despite the extraordinary things going on in the country and really in the world. We've got an issue that, concerning which I've heard a lot from Chelmsfordians about, and it has to do with increasing gas prices, right? People's monthly gas bills. It's really hit people because of the coldness of the winter. And I'm hearing from some people who really are stressed and can't afford to pay. Actually, we have programs to help people who are really up against it, low and moderate income. It's the group of folks just above people who are really struggling, who are in some ways the most irritated, because the bills still go up, even if you can afford them, an additional $300 a month for January 2025 compared to a year ago is still incredibly aggravating. We're trying to figure out in the State House what the component parts of the problem are. I've asked the chair of the DPU, who's a good guy. Governor Healy made a good appointment to the regulatory agency that sets gas rates and sets electric rates. And I've said to him, look, take the average increase for somebody in my district from January of 2024 to January of 2025, tell us what the dollar difference is, and then break it down in very simple terms. What pieces of the puzzle are attributable to the fact that it is, of course, undeniably colder, right? That's the primary problem. We've had 2 mild winters, and there's a sense in which this winter feels like an ambush. It's really a default back to normal for New England. Still, your expectations begin to change, and to be hit suddenly with this kind of chill and this kind of monthly gas bill can be a shock. So tell us what part of the puzzle is attributable to our consuming more therms of natural gas to stay warm, or gallons of heating oil. But what part, on the other hand, is attributable to utility profits? Eversource and National Grid give us either our gas or our electricity almost throughout the state of Massachusetts. How are we doing there? Are there excess profits? How much is attributable to programs like Mass Save, which are crucially important, but are add-ons to the bill too? What we're seeking, and what we don't have, despite the efforts of journalists who have done their best, what we really don't have is enough, well, information. It's hard to know who to be irritated at. We just know we are irritated. So I wish I could tell you that the DPUs come back to me with the buckets of dollar increases attributable to different causes. I outlined 6 possible causative influences. I'd like to know what's the dollar cost of that one and the remaining 5 right down the line so that I can have something better to say to people. The other thing we did in the State House today, by the way, is that we're very concerned to continue the kind of climate policy commitments that of necessity are going to outlast President Trump himself, because there's only one force, well, there are several, but one force more powerful than the force Mr. Trump exerts is the force of nature. Climate change is even tougher and meaner than Donald Trump. And it's going to last longer. So how does Massachusetts preserve very important inroads we've made so that we can regain our pace even if we fall off the pace during the next 4 years because the feds have thrown us a little off balance? An example, of course, would be EVs. Too expensive for many of us, and all of us have that charger anxiety thing. If I were to buy one of these cars and I were to take them up to Maine or up to New Hampshire, Vermont, or to visit my kids in New York, would I run out of electricity? My wife and I have put those fears to the test. We bought an EV. We took it to Quebec City through rural Vermont and then rural Quebec before we got to Quebec City, which is a great place to visit. I was actually going to talk to Canadians about climate matters, but we paid our own way. Still, we were there to talk about climate, but I wanted to test the presence of EV chargers along the way. The good news is we found them. The rest of the news is it was quite an adventure to find them. So our job is to deploy more of these chargers so that one of the two factors holding you back, the other would be price, the amount of hesitation you have attributable to whether these things exist at regular intervals is something Massachusetts needs to be about, even if Mr. Trump is discouraging the electrification of transportation, a critical piece of our climate policy, right? It's a battle. I don't want to pretend otherwise, to keep the state moving ahead when the feds, who are a critical partner, fall off the game. That is something around which there is no consensus yet in the State House, but it's the kind of problem, staying the course, doing your job, doing our part. It's the kind of problem that we've got to address, even if the next 4 years are very difficult. I'll mention one other thing because it's was on my mind when I went door to door in Chelmsford not too long ago. It feels like it was yesterday when I had a very heated and contested primary, and we worked hard in this town. And I used to look around, I still do, in Chelmsford and Lexington, where I live, in Bedford and Carlisle, and I count the number of homes with solar panels. Some have them, but a lot of us just are too distracted, busy. Maybe we can't afford the upfront money. If offshore wind is going to be in a serious deep freeze because of Mr. Trump, and for a whole bunch of reasons, the feds are critical to the deployment of all those windmills in the ocean, that would be a very significant source of clean electric power to take the place of natural gas and oil and coal-fired power. Trump does have the ability to hold us back, not entirely. We've got an early start, so we're going to see some of the first offshore windmills in the United States gear up despite Mr. Trump, but he is going to stop us from fast following with additional developments of that kind because there's some federal licensing authorities around, over which he's got significant leverage. So if your offshore wind piece is going to be slower than you'd like, how do you compensate? Solar is the other real possibility, which is why I sort of walk around my neighborhood looking at south-facing roofs and trying to figure out why the panels aren't there. I don't need to tell you folks, those of you who have thought about it, those of you who haven't had time to think about it yet, or haven't had the money to think about it, that it's a difficult call. Still, the great thing about solar panels is that there is a payback, right? We can calculate with reasonable confidence that if you could muster together the upfront money, you'd make it back in an average of about 7 years, which means you must be planning to stay in your house. If you're considering retiring or downsizing or moving somewhere, that would be a hard, difficult call to make. But if you imagine that you're going to be in Chelmsford, in the place you currently live, and you've got a roof that isn't shaded by trees and that's oriented more or less towards the sun in the morning, solar is a great investment. Unlike adding a porch or a deck, Unlike adding a second space for the garage, it actually makes you money if you're willing to wait 7 years. I'm not saying those other things don't give you pleasure, but what we can say about solar panels is you can break even by selling that electricity back to the grid, right? Net metering, and start to make money on the deal in a relatively bearable amount of time. So Massachusetts taking account of Trump would probably involve our acknowledging that he can really hurt the deployment of offshore wind, and are putting additional stress, more than you've seen to date, on bringing your attention to the rewards of solar on your roof. And that would require marketing on the part of Massachusetts, and it would, because the knowledge isn't quite out there. But it's the kind of tactical reorientation that the state needs to make, again, to recognize that things have changed in D.C. I want to talk, though, about, and this is probably, I think, something Chelmsford's already doing, but it's been interesting to see it out in my other towns. There's the federal picture, daunting. State picture, promising, but in need of reorientation. And then, of course, perhaps most importantly of all, there's what you can do locally. In several of my towns, an organization that's now trying to go statewide, although it depends on town-by-town buy-in, named Mass Energize, has gotten underway. So Mass Energize, which has attracted a few modest state grants, calls on folks who are retired or who have some spare time and who know something about construction to serve as coaches for people in the community who might be interested in solar or heat pumps or EV chargers. The financial picture for each of those investments, of course, is different. The challenges to accommodating your driveway, your garage, or your house vary a little bit. What you'd really do, ideally, is talk to somebody who's a neighbor right here in the community who knows something about this because she was involved with it when she was employed full-time, or he built it when he was a full-time electrician. So these teams of volunteers, I've had one come to my house. These teams of volunteers are on call. You schedule them. You're in touch with Mass Energize Chelmsford or Mass Energize Concord. They come out. They're very smart. You can take their information or not, satisfy yourself that it really makes sense to you. But what's impressed me about Mass Energize and its local chapters is that it's possible really to feel that in your own neighborhood, you're connecting with folks who would like to do the right thing on balance, but have challenges in terms of the time they can spare, the money they can spare, other things going on in their lives, questions about whether the technology will work, technical questions, in other words. It's terrific to feel that you've gone through some training and that you can answer those questions and help Chelmsford go green in a way that works for the family you're helping. So what we're going to emphasize, I think, in Massachusetts over the next, well, certainly for the next 4 years, during the time that Mr. Trump is in the White House, is the importance of local action, the importance of, again, a revised strategy statewide that makes sense and that acknowledges the impacts that he's going to have on things like wind energy. And eventually, meanwhile, all of us, and again, this town is a good town for us to think about this. At the same time, we have to ask ourselves of how did we get to this point where the country is so divided? And what can we do about it? Because if we need to solve and to get that basic healing process going in order to make sure that the climate enterprise goes well in the future, right? Because it can be caught up in the cultural wars if we're not careful. And that can be very, very tough. Somehow we have to make sure that this becomes an issue that unites and does not divide. One of the things I spent a lot of time on in 2024 when we passed a major climate bill is to make sure that the situation of the person who pays the monthly bill, the ratepayer, the citizen, is always taken into account. And usually people don't need to be reminded in state government that people we go home to every night are really paying the freight for this stuff. But for a variety of reasons, some of them understandable, sometimes sight is lost. Questions of cost are always pushed to the end of a conversation, not consistently, but frequently enough to give me pause. So the job, and my Senate colleagues have encouraged me to do this, my job, I feel, is to make sure that the middle class isn't forgotten as we try to deal with this existential threat. The entire world can go into rebellion against going green if the cost is just sky high and drives you crazy. Puts you in a position where you say, great, but I really, really can't afford this for my family. So there's always a balancing. And one thing we're going to try to keep in mind in Massachusetts is that we can talk about solar, we can talk about heat pumps, we can talk about electric vehicles, but the question of affordability and whether you're talking over people's heads or directly to them and hearing what they say back to you, that remains an absolutely critical question, or this whole enterprise could go south. People could get very angry at what is asked of them as climate grinds on us day in and day out. So we're trying to balance doing the right thing and making sure that people can afford to do the right thing. And getting that balance right just takes a lot of conversation and a lot of thought. I don't think I'll go, I'd like to hear your comments, deal with your questions. I just want you to know that I'm impressed with your legislative delegation. You actually have 3 terrific state reps who represent you in the Massachusetts House. They're thinking about, I think, these same issues every day. I'm thinking about them, worried about them, and trying to get the balance right. And I just want to thank, first of all, I want to thank the folks who put together this meeting. Thank you very much, Chelmsford Climate Action. I really appreciate being asked to speak. And I hope that all of us can kind of problem solve together over the course of the next 4 years, because clearly, of course, there's a lot of work to be done. I see some old friends. It's great to see so many folks here who I know are concerned about the issue. So what do you think? How should we proceed here? Yes?
Well, procrastination. James Hansen Messer, 1987 was when he really started talking about climate change, and of course, procrastination. 1987.
It's a long time ago.
China.
Why don't you stand up and, oh, what's your name, by the way?
No, Jack Nolan. Oh,
Whoops, okay.
sorry about that. The situation with China is the cars.
Actually, why don't you address folks here?
Cars.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
Actually, there's a mic for you.
okay.
that's right, yeah.
Okay. Cars in China are about 12,000, and they're just as good as Tesla.
Those sending
So,
Yeah.
so why buy a Tesla?
Great.
Except for the tariff. If you buy a truck with the tariff, it could be $10,000 more than the price of the car with the tariff. The other thing is about climate change in Florida. 2100. Most of the state will probably be underwater. 2100. We won't hear, but so.
Well, so what question would you propound?
What's going to happen to, speak into the mic, to Cape Cod?
Well, I tell you, if you want to, even closer to home, there is this amazing, the question is, what will happen to Massachusetts and where are the pain points as the oceans get higher and the weather gets more erratic and the summers get hotter. There are, Cape Cod is a real thing to be worried about, but closer to home, you've got the seaport. David Abel, a documentary filmmaker and a sometimes Globe reporter, has made a documentary about, in which he captured a surge that washed over the seaport about 4 winters ago, and talks about the new construction that's happening there right at water level, right at ground zero. Very, very scary stuff. So we've got to, but we are working on it, but it is scary. Yes?
Working on, sorry, can you elaborate on that? Like, how can you just let it keep being developed knowing that it's going to be underwater? Like, what, is there anybody that speaks out against it? Or
The state doesn't have powers to prevent a developer interacting with the city of Boston and building. Even the city of Boston has limited power if the private owner has possession. There's some zoning requirements, but very little that the state can do. On the other hand, insurance companies, as you all know, right, are speaking very loudly here. What's got to happen is that we have to, in a sense, on this one, step out of the way and let the private market speak to the property owners involved. Those rates by rights should go very, very high, but there are some federal stopgaps, some federal bailout programs for folks who live in coastal areas that are endangered. One of the good things we could do is to let the insurance industry price the risk, and so that we no longer subsidize folks with our own rates, I might add, who build in places they shouldn't. And that is happening, right? You've been reading, I know, about California, even about Florida, where they have a bail. The irony is that there is a very significant bailout fund the state of Florida runs so that you can build in a very dangerous place, see it destroyed by a hurricane, rebuild there. That's on that one, we probably need to see the market signals sent. Yes?
can you, sorry, just very last follow-up on that, but the state does not have a specific bailout on that.
We don't bail people out in Massachusetts. Yeah. So the important thing is that we maintain that position. There is pressure, by the way, from coastal towns like on the South Shore, particularly Situate and Hull. We do get pressure, and we've said no so far, and I think we need to continue. Yes, I just want to let this young woman speak. Yes, hi.
We're holding the mics for the people.
Oh, I'm sorry. Then okay. Yeah.
Frank Hansen. For just a second, I just want to mention on Friday here at the library at 1 o'clock, LIRA, Learning Retirement Association and the library, are sponsoring a film called The Inundation District. And that will
You should come to that. That is scary.
Seaport as well as
Yes.
It's hi. Mike's still down from Bedford. I work with 350. And I don't want to get into inside baseball, but Massachusetts was in the process of shifting away from Mass Save being run by the gas utilities. And I'd just like to know how you feel about the continuation of that and what you hope for in a future climate bill, say in 2 years.
Yeah. I have sponsored legislation to reorganize Mass Save. You guys are familiar with Mass Save in general, how it operates. In other states, a citizens board or a statewide board, the state of Maine, for example, operates the program. Here, the utilities are in charge. I have proposed a change so that we go toward Maine. That said, I want to give the utilities their due. We are always ranked either the best or the second best in the United States by a group in D.C., the ACEEE, that thinks about this stuff.
You look at their rates of transition in this. We've got to do almost every house in the state. We got to transition them to either heat pumps and good insulation, and we're walking at a snail's pace. I mean, we may be in front, but it's a race between snails.
Yeah. Well, let me. You mentioned inside baseball. Let me tell you a battle I've been fighting this week, just to show you how tricky this stuff is. And this would be true even if utilities weren't in charge. A significant, not most of the increase in your gas bill is due to the fact that it's colder than it was a year ago. And temperature is always going to oscillate a little bit. However, there is a significant energy efficiency charge. You see it on your electric bill. They don't break it out on the gas bill, but it's there. We are stepping up our mass save efforts. We're going to propose to spend a significant amount of money in order to narrow that gap between where we need to be and where we are. But it does express itself as an increase in people's monthly bills. So again, you can't go crazy because you're going to put people under incredible stress. Working class families, some middle class families. So we want to have an ambitious mass save program in order to get to where we need to be in terms of climate. We also want to make sure that people can afford to pay, because in a sense we're all self-financing this, right? There are no federal monies. This is a program that the people who pay the monthly bill mount and finance. And so I always keep an eye on the possibility that we could lose people's support if they feel too exasperated. Sir, yeah.
Yeah, my name is Jesse Hines. I live in the village of Meadowwood, which is a community of freestanding homes, but it's through a homeowners association, okay? So it's important to emphasize that they're freestanding homes. Now, you've stressed the desirability of solar, right? And I was refused permission to put solar panels on my roof.
You've been in touch with our office.
I got been served of your office. So,
You've educated us. Thank you.
well, this is House Bill 3685, which was filed by Josh Cutler 2 years ago. And I know you're a senator, you're a representative, et cetera.
Also, we do the bills in
So, I've been quoting to you the reason that they turned it down, but basically it comes down to aesthetics.
comes down to the.
Aesthetics. They just don't
Oh,
like the
this,
look.
you're talking about your condo association.
Talking about the condo association, exactly. So I'm just asking your support, because there's a specific statement in this bill that says, quote, no association shall forbid or unreasonably restrict the installation or use of a solar energy system.
Yeah, so you have my support. I want to rewrite the bill because these things can always be improved. When I say rewrite it, I mean I could raise a lot of legal, I'm an attorney, forgive me for that. I could raise a lot of legal problems with Josh's bill, but directionally he's right. Now that said, we did hear Josh, and we did a whole bunch of things in 2024 with respect to EV charging and condos, and EV charging and homeowners association, because it was a somewhat easier problem than solar. So we bit off a big chunk and we got the stuff passed. If you want an EV charger in your standalone home, you now have a legal right to do it. Solar was tougher.
Most recent bill, but that's
Yeah.
not solar.
No, that's right. Here's why we couldn't figure out a way to go forward with Josh's idea. And by the way, this is what I'm about to describe is an example of why I find my job so interesting and why I would like to see more people running for office or involving themselves in these things. It is important to really be very thoughtful about this stuff. Of course, that said, you're dealing with 199 other legislators, each of whom has a different idea about what should be a priority, and the crush of priorities is a problem in and of itself. But here's what we did with regard to EV charging that we couldn't do with regard to solar in condominium developments. I personally went looking for the state's condo law. Josh, I think, amends Chapter 184 of the general laws, which was a good guess on his part, but Chapter 183A, as it happens, this is really boring. Chapter 183A of the general laws actually is the state's condominium law. And as I read that very carefully, and asking myself, okay, what's fair? You've got these individual condo owners, everybody has a say, everyone has a vote. So there are two separate issues. There are the common areas. We can simplify the process for putting solar or an EV charger in an area that is run for the entire good of the community. But then, quite apart from that, is the individual unit. And then there's the democratic process by which condo associations run, right? I was able to write language that got the support of my colleagues with respect to EV charging, because EV chargers don't create an enormous aesthetic impact. You can justify and you can explain to a legislator who's not thinking much about this stuff because her priority is somewhere else. You can say, look, we're talking about an EV charger in the garage or in the driveway of this condominium owner who's part of an association. That's an issue that other owners in the same complex shouldn't have any problem with. It's a charger. They're not big. They don't create a visual impact. I was able to persuade these legislators that we should give you new rights to deal with your charger. But then I turned to solar, and I tried to make the same argument, and they said, whoa, wait a second. And the one problem with Josh's bill, not that I'm blaming Josh, he's a great American, but I'm just saying, he doesn't distinguish between the freestanding house and the townhouse, or for that matter, the high-rise condo. He wrote language that would apply to every condo situation, and of course, in many cases, the solar panels would go on your neighbor's roof when they went on yours, because you might be living on top of one another in a 2-story condominium or a 3-story condominium, maybe a converted factory. So how do you sort out the rights there? It's not like a charger, assuming that I have at least the right to a driveway or a parking space. Now I'm talking about changing a roof that multiple people can lay claim to. I will tell you honestly, I ran out of time at that point. I said, look, I want to plant a flag here. We've got a lot of other, the bill has 140 sections, 140 discrete ideas, of which this is an important one, but it's one. So we managed to change the law with respect to EV charging in condos and homeowners association. And we did a second thing. I managed to write language because someone had done an early draft for me that was pretty good, a fellow legislator, to make it easier for you to put solar on your non-historic house, even if it's situated in an historic district, of which Chelmsford has several. But I did literally run out of time when I came to Josh's bill, because he hadn't distinguished between situations where a whole bunch of owners might have, well, literally share a roof in common. I couldn't carve out, of course you hadn't been in touch with me at the time, and I wasn't thinking about single-family condo developments. So I feel badly, but that's a good one for us to take on in the next session.
Thank you.
Yes, hi.
Hello. Thank you for being here with us today. My name is Jeff Becerra, Chelmsford resident. In my day job, I'm the chair of the Department of Environmental, Earth, and Atmospheric Sciences at the University of Massachusetts. I'm a weather and climate scientist. Relatively recently moved here within the last couple of years. And I think you would agree, and most people in this room would, that Massachusetts is a state that is climate progressive. And having lived in one of those other states, the red states, I moved from the state of Oklahoma. It's about as red as they get. By the way, I have a really good recommendation. As a person who educates people, I'm shocked at how many of our students never actually leave the Northeast to go actually visit other places where people have different ideas. If you ever want to bridge the gaps, go visit somebody.
You have a lot more onshore wind a lot more wind power than we do.
And you know what? Their problems are the same. If it's an agricultural producer, they're trying to pay the bills. They're feeding America, by the way, and they're then being told by others that what they're doing is wrong. And yet they're just trying to feed America and raise their kids. And they're good Americans, by the way. I love that question, the way you stated that. My question is simply this, because we talk a lot about climate tech in the state of Massachusetts. So I wanted to hear what your thoughts are on investment in climate tech in terms of growing the enterprise here in the state. And specifically from my perspective, one thing that we are interested in is growing up our observational capabilities. It's interesting that 30 states of the United States have dedicated observation sites statewide, about every 20 to 30 miles. Massachusetts does not. New York does.
When you say observation sites, help me out a little.
Yeah, so everybody wants to know what the weather climate is. And if you want to, if you're a doctor, they would recommend that you go.
We have Blue Hills.
Yeah, we have a couple of sites.
We have a couple of sites here.
For example, the state of Oklahoma has 130 across its state. Every 5 minutes, any citizen, can get observations of temperature, humidity, precipitation. It's like a doctor being able to, we'll tell you to get a regular checkup, but if you're not taking the observations, you don't know. So our climate monitoring in the state is actually pretty, I hate to say, far behind other locations.
It's good to hear. I mean, it's good for me to hear.
But one point is just, as part of the investment, is the state of Massachusetts interested in sort of developing better observational capabilities to monitor our climate? Because we've had Blue Hill or Harvard Forest or a few other locations, we all know that if you go out to the tip of the Cape, to the west, out to the Berkshires, Blue Hill doesn't necessarily represent either of those locations. And we need observations in those different communities and those different spaces to help all of our citizens in the state. I was just curious what your thoughts were along those lines.
Well, first of all, you raise a good question about clean tech. And as you know, because UMass Lowell has been a real leader here, we're doing a lot in an economic development bill that passed just 3 months ago to bring clean technology, broadly defined, and it can involve, as you know, hundreds of potential products, up to where life sciences is or are, right? So life sciences is we did spot an opportunity. I mean, we were doing well in life sciences in the 1990s, but Deval Patrick deserves some credit, and people in the academic world do. Beginning about 20 years ago, they went to the governor and said, you know what? We're in the top 5 in terms of life sciences, in terms of pharmaceuticals and startups, small companies. In the top 5, San Diego's strong, San Francisco's strong, New Jersey, New York has always been a center of pharmaceutical industry activity. But we've got the possibility of really moving out front if you invest a significant amount of money in college undergraduates and grad students and seed funding for startups spun off by academicians and by researchers and scientists. So we made that commitment. Last year, we made a similar commitment on clean tech. We gave it a 10-year funding cycle instead of annual appropriations, which make it impossible for companies to think about the long term. We created a 10-year runway. We renewed our 10-year commitment another 10 years for life sciences and gave a 10-year commitment to clean tech. UMass Lowell is going to be very much involved with this. All kinds of startups are happening, right? I'll tell you, if you want to talk about things that Massachusetts, again, but I want to address before I go off on a tangent. So we care a lot about clean technology. There are lots of innovators in Massachusetts, lots of folks working in their laboratories or their garages to get interesting things going, and we have funded that. With regard to climate monitoring, the emphasis in Massachusetts has been on an adjacent problem. I'll be honest with you. I'm not approached by my colleagues on the climate monitoring front, so that's why it's helpful for me to hear from you. What they've approached me on instead is air quality monitoring. So this is what, is your air clean or is it poisonous? And I'm pleased to say that we have funded a lot of air quality monitors in the state. I've got an app on my phone. I won't yank it out and bore you by clicking on it and reading our air quality ratings for Chelmsford, but we can get them. And so we focused on, and the reason that's a climate issue, of course, is because we want to take diesel trucks, especially out of urban neighborhoods, including neighborhoods in Lowell, and certainly neighborhoods in Boston. There's a lot of truck activity at the ground level that gives people, leaves populations with higher rates of asthma and other respiratory conditions, right? COPD. So we focused on the public health crisis, which is adjacent to this weather monitoring crisis, and we made serious inroads. The number of air quality monitors we have in Massachusetts is now significantly greater than it was 5 years ago. So you're basically telling me to pivot, and I don't blame you. So
Just want to make sure we keep up with New York and Maine.
well, we want to keep up with Oklahoma.
And that's the alternative. If a state like Oklahoma invests for 30 years into something like that, why is it we not doing that in the state of
Good point. Well, yeah.
Was it for the reason of Hurricane Alley?
It might be.
No,
Could be.
agriculture.
Yes.
Oh,
Handsome man in the back row there.
Good to see you, Senator Schwan, Sector Holt, and Schauspitz. When my family and I first got our solo drive, we were wondering the same thing about what the neighbors would think. And what my son said, that actually has a cool, modern format. And I think it does. But here's my real question. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts owns a lot of buildings. The municipalities within the Commonwealth of Massachusetts own a lot of buildings. Schools, police stations, fire stations, hospitals, universities, and so forth. If those were all covered with solar panels, I believe they would, A, use automatic, and B, people would get used to seeing more solar. It was just a thought.
Thank you, Lawrence. Lawrence and I do a lot of communicating, so he's a...
We go way back.
Let me just say, so you're absolutely right. We need to lead by example at the state government level. Now, we are doing a lot of stuff, but here's the hierarchy of solar affordability. Remember, in one way or the other, you guys pay for all of this. So we're interested in deploying solar, but keeping your costs, which you cover through your taxes, down as much as we can. The cheapest form of solar is ground mounted. If you can cover a median strip on a Massachusetts highway, and you've seen lots of stuff on I-90, the Mass Pike going west, for example, that's where you can put a lot of solar panels that can generate a lot of megawatts at the least cost per megawatt. The next most affordable is on your roof. As long as we keep net metering in place so that basically you become a small business. I mean, you become an energy producer when you put solar panels on the roof. And we want to help you start that small side business of yours. And we want to make sure you can make a little money even as you help the planet. The most expensive form of solar is when it's not on the ground, which is a pretty stable foundation, and it's not on a roof that was built for some other purpose, like to put one over your head. It's a roof we have to specially construct to bear those panels. So this would be a canopy over a parking lot of a high school. Putting a canopy up that doesn't exist and wouldn't exist but for the solar panels is very expensive per megawatt. And by the way, you can't build a canopy in a high school parking lot unless it meets hurricane-resistant standards, right? These things have got to be able to withstand the erratic weather that we're seeing. So this becomes pretty expensive. Now, that isn't to say that there aren't solar canopies in school parking lots all across Massachusetts. There are. I'm just saying that it's the most expensive form of solar. And so we haven't gone bonkers there. And let's talk about ground-mounted solar because, again, I find the work that I do very worthwhile, very hard, but very worthwhile to think about, and constantly changing, which is why I remain involved. So here's a problem that didn't exist 3 years ago, but now exists big time. And it's something that our young people might be able to help with once they go off to school, if they choose to go to college. We do have available land in Massachusetts. Land in eastern Mass, Chelmsford included, is expensive. You get to central Massachusetts, it's better. You get to the Pioneer Valley and the Berkshires, land is pretty affordable, and you have farmers, small family-owned farms, who are looking for additional sources of income. So they might be quite interested in taking unproductive ground and putting ground-mounted solar on a portion of the farm. You help the property owner, you help the state generate clean energy. We've now succeeded to the point where we face a full-blown rebellion on the part of towns that are very blue. They vote Democratic. They've had it with ground-mounted solar. They're telling their state reps and their state senators, because enough, they say, has been built. Now, this is a real problem. You've got Trump killing offshore wind. You've got ground-mounted solar as the most affordable kind of solar to deploy. And you have community activists, in many cases. Well, I don't want to hypothesize where students who go to UMass Amherst might come down, but issues involving Amherst and immediately adjoining communities are where we're now seeing significant citizen resistance to the construction of more ground-mounted solar. Based on what? There's a small town immediately next to Amherst, for example, that has a population of 2,000. Shutesbury. Are you familiar with Shutesbury, Massachusetts? Yes. It's a gorgeous little town. Shutesbury has about 9 solar farms because local farmers there have welcomed the prospect of getting additional sources of income. The town of Shutesbury cannot afford a town planner. So when they review these proposals by developers, they have no way to match the hours of research that the developer's gone into choosing a site. The site may not be optimal. It may be optimal for the developer, maybe even for the farmer, but it may be too close to a source of water. Or it may be too close to a beautiful stretch of open space that Shutesbury has valued for decades. There are all kinds of reasons why you need to fine-tune these choices, and Shutesbury's had no ability to fight a fair fight. And so they've said, we want a moratorium, no more. Here's what we did in the 2024 climate bill. We tried to listen, first of all. People from Shutesbury, which is a gorgeous place, near UMass Amherst, where my daughter went to school, came into the State House, but they also made their case to their state senator, Joe Comerford, who's a terrific progressive on these things. And we did several things to help them out. First of all, we said, look, you do deserve to have the funds to push back in order to have a conversation that yields the best compromise. So we're going to start to fund interveners. In the end, this stuff is resolved by regulatory agencies in Boston. We get the developer's proposal to build a solar farm. We see the town is in opposition. The Energy Facility Siting Board in Boston, in the end, has to make the call after hearing from all parties. We're going to fund interveners for Shutesbury to appear before the EFSB. And not only that, if it's a neighborhood group, it doesn't have to be a town. If the neighborhood group is the one who's raised issues, serious questions about where the solar farm should go, we're going to create funds in a capped way. It's not unlimited money, but we're going to give the neighborhood group an opportunity to make a pitch and to hire a lawyer or maybe an engineering consultant in order to make a pitch for them. But secondly, we're going to require that the developer, if it works out a deal with a community, provide community benefits. We're going to require it to negotiate with the municipality to see whether it could also fund a local park or fund the restoration of a nearby beautiful place that was eroded because of a recent storm. Whatever the community benefit is, it's chosen by the community. It's negotiated with the developer. It's not simply imposed by fiat. But we want to see that the town, in the end, believes that it's come out with a win-win. So we're putting serious money into making sure that there's a real negotiation, right? In the hopes of ending this resistance to solar, which, as I say, didn't exist 3 or 4 years ago, and is coming at us at a time when we need solar as a substitute for wind more than ever. So we're trying to be as smart as we can and think about these things. Yes, hi.
Hello, my name is Anisha Dantham, and I'm currently a co-president of the high school's ecology club. So I just wanted to start off by giving a little insight into what exactly we do at the high school and kind of our mission. So our mission is to make both our high school and the overall Chelmsford community more environmentally conscious and kind of educating them more about how to practice sustainability. So a couple of years ago, we actually implemented our high school's very first composting program. And since then, each month, we're able to generate about 3 tons of compost. So with that, we're able to offset a lot of like environmental impact that the school has made. For example, this year, I know we've been able to compost about like 10,000 pounds of waste, food waste from our school lunches. And also we educate middle school students about like our composting code program so that they're ready to know how like our system works when they enter high school, so we can prevent various problems like cross-contamination in our compost. And also a lot of our students are very involved with volunteering opportunities and helping like the overall Chelmsford community become more.
This sounds terrific.
Yeah, so for example, we organize a lot of like trash cleanups around our school. So we ask a lot of volunteering organizations within the school, like National Honor Societies, like Interact Club, and they all help us with removing the waste and trash around our school. And also we have volunteered with the recycling committee, the Chelmsford Recycling Committee, and like hazardous waste day and zero waste day, all that. And this year we're actually working on a really big tree planting project. So we're planting about, we think as of now, 3 trees around the school. And our goal with this is kind of to reduce the carbon emissions that the school produces and overall reduce its impact. So
Wow, you're blowing me away.
yeah, we're all really passionate about climate action and sustainability for sure. So one question that I had for you is generally, how would you say the state of Massachusetts can support student-led climate clubs and organizations? And specifically for us, over the past couple of years, we've had to apply for grants every single year from a company called New England Biolabs to support our composting initiative. But we're wondering, like, is there any way the state can maybe fund or set aside a budget so that they can support us in the long term?
Yeah. Well, it's a thank you for a question, and thank you for all you're doing. That is incredible. I think the path that composting is going to take will involve its becoming a town responsibility like trash pickup. We've started this in Lexington, but only this year. Until this year, we were paying, as a family, we were paying a composting service to come by. Now composting is available to every home in Lexington, but it is being financed by town government at a time when town government certainly is stressed doing other things. Still, on balance, we thought it was worthwhile. The question of state grants hasn't been raised, so thank you for raising it. It hasn't been broached. I do depend on a lot on my colleagues to kind of tell me what their citizens, what their voters are talking about. So we want to encourage composting for sure. We haven't considered funding the program directly as kind of a grant to cities and towns. So thank you for raising that. That's interesting.
Yes.
Hi.
Senator Barrett, thank you. My name is Tadriu Plef, and I'm also the Chelmsford Clean Energy and Sustainability Committee member chair. 3 questions probably. How do we make sure that the social cost of carbon is included, which is a complex theory in itself.
Right.
However, it's the most powerful variable that MIT's En-ROAD climate simulator talks about as the way to control carbon price. It's known as carbon tax, carbon price, whatever it be, but essentially a pricing index to say whatever you are putting out as waste has a cost to it, and you're optimizing in a true capitalistic manner.
Right.
How do we at state level adopt that?
Okay.
Communicate that down possibly.
Okay.
So that's a big ticket item. So that's the question number one.
Okay, that's the
Price.
first question.
Right? The second question is when we look at transportation and we look at all the needs for electrification and everything else, along with high density housing that is coming up under MBTA zoning and the ADU Act or other kinds of things. The ADUs will generate their own stuff. Previous gentleman, a speaker said about condo associations not having the ability to put solar under the new law. We have an urgency factor coming in with new housing and housing prices increasing. High density housing holds the key to having reduced price, potentially reduced housing costs and transportation, integrated transportation. So because that is in your committee in that sense, how do you talk about these two? And the third one on solarized Massachusetts, can we re-kick that off? Because you pointed out correctly, rooftop solar, and according to the Mass Audubon Harvard study that says we have enough rooftop to actually get close to the 30 gigawatt capacity that Massachusetts needs.
Okay.
How do we get to that?
3 easy questions.
Very tough, but those are what we would like as policy framework to help people move in the right direction because they are foundational.
Corey.
So let's start with carbon pricing. You are talking to a convert. For 10 years, I've submitted carbon pricing legislation. It hasn't moved very far as explicit policy, but that doesn't mean it's not happening. Transparency, we all know that government needs more of it, whether it's Washington or Massachusetts. So we were very transparent in our fight for carbon pricing, which, I'm sorry, what's your name?
Badri.
As Muzzy points out, carbon pricing is, in a sense, is common sense, right? If you know that polluting today is going to require Chelmsford to clean up a piece of property tomorrow, why not build it? This is an analogy. Why not build the cost of cleanup into the original action? You cover the cost, so you're not ambushing people at a point later in time. But two, you're properly pricing it. You're not overpricing the action. You're actually accurately pricing it. What people do when a price goes up, when it's accurate and not excessive, is that they try to do less of the thing. We try to avoid a higher cost. And that's a very healthy human reaction. So if you can fairly price an active pollution, it's going to make me want to avoid paying the increased cost. So ideally, I'll do something less polluting over here. That's the elegance of carbon pricing. It's fair. The reason I haven't managed to pass it, the House of Representatives in particular has opposed it. The Senate has actually supported carbon pricing, I'm pleased to say, and we've included it in one of the 3 climate bills we have proposed most recently. But the House has fought it very strongly because it is, well, a tax. It is you would pay more for the good, and there are always conservatives eager to remind people that what we're basically proposing is to increase a gallon of gasoline, or increase the price of a gallon of home heating oil, or increase further a therm of natural gas. So they can gain ground on us. But here's what we've done. And we haven't done this because to be deceptive. We've done it just because the calculations are the computations are very confusing and very complex. We've taken mass save, And we've said, how do you figure out whether we should help you put insulation in your house? Should we take that money we collect, which, by the way, we collect on your monthly electric and gas bills? That's how Mass Save is funded. We want to be careful because it's your money. How do we prioritize the subsidy we should provide to people who want to put a heat pump using some Mass Save monies? So we do, in fact, use the social cost of carbon. We use carbon pricing every day in Massachusetts. It's not over the top, explicitly called a carbon price, as my bill would have us do. Instead, it's factored into the prioritization of what you're paying for through Mass Save. We have a carbon price by which we gauge the cost effectiveness of a conservation measure. It happens to be, and it's high. It's $200 per metric ton of CO2 equivalent avoided. That is a higher carbon price than Barack Obama supported when he was at $50. It's even higher than President Biden supported. I think in the end, he, in federal calculations, did something like 180. We're at $200, which means that we can justify using your energy efficiency collections on your bills to do a whole bunch of heat pumps. So that's, there's more that can be said, but I
want to add a note that
Yeah.
that $200 is the right number from IPCC 2020 or some number. So
yeah.
you are following international scientific protocol.
Yes, we are.
Price, but not the American federal government of the previous Democratic presidents and stuff, but the right scientific model.
Thank you. So I'm pleased at what we're doing in terms of Mass Save, but I can tell you it's coming under attack. As recently as this week, people are trying to single out Mass Save and saying we need to slash the amount we're subsidizing. I've even had a colleague of mine, a very smart guy, who's gone after me on the social cost of carbon at $200 a metric ton. I don't want to say I've held him at bay. I think I've reassured him that we're going to be thoughtful about this, but we get a lot of heat because we're using a high social cost of carbon. Let's go on to your second question, which is dense housing. This MBTA, this transportation-oriented development thing, I think, again, many of you are familiar with the basic idea, which is an interesting idea. If you live within a half mile of an MBTA bus stop or commuter rail station, you've got to choose a certain proportion of the land within a half mile of that transit node and make it open to multiple family housing. You don't build the stuff, you don't guarantee that it's built, but you rezone so that, at least in theory, it could be built. Why? Because we want to reintroduce the idea of walkable communities. We want to get people out of their cars. The sensible way to do that is to build housing that they can near enough to a mass transit opportunity so that the walk is reasonable even in the winter. Great idea. I represent 8 communities. I'm getting pushback, not to the point where things are at a standstill. I'm just saying this is a heated discussion in all 8, right? I'm sure it's been a heated discussion in Chelmsford. This is very, very difficult. Everyone loves, well, at least in the towns I represent, are happy to be living where they're living. These are great communities, and there is this understandable human instinct to keep things, to do one's part, but to keep things as they are at the same time. Figuring out how to negotiate a new compromise where you do keep the beauty of a Chelmsford, but you also provide some multiple unit dwellings somewhere is, well, it's the work of town government, isn't it? And it's the work of state government, and it's very difficult because you're going to disagree with your neighbor about, actually, in this case, I have a lively discussion going on involving transit-oriented development with my wife, who is as blue as they come, but who's drawn the line because of the walk she loves to take every morning, and she doesn't want to see an apartment building built nearby. I'm managing to hold my own, but it's a tough conversation at the breakfast table. So we're going to do that, and we are doing it. But it's, and we have to keep at it. You know, again, just to default to Trump for a minute, everything we're talking about, if we can just do our jobs as citizens and engage with these kinds of issues and think our way to a reasonably fair and a reasonably smart resolution, we can survive Mr. Trump. So it really is kind of get up every day, whether you're retired or working, whether you're working at home or in an office, get up every day, do what you've got to do for your family and to support and to take care of yourself, and find a little additional margin to contribute to the community. And if we can just manage to do that, we're going to, for the next 4 years, we're going to be okay. Your third issue.
Solarized Massachusetts reigniting it on rooftop.
So we have the Mass Smart program.
Yes, but you already identified, and with a caveat very gently dropped, that if net metering survives and California is dropping it, and there's a big opposition to that, yet rooftop solar is the best form of national security. I would frame it that.
Good for you. You should run for office.
I'm not about that, but I was framed in that direct way. That people don't understand why natural gas under our ground should be protected for as long as it should be before releasing it. Because if there's free money coming out from roofs or from the sky, I would like to take that. How do we build that nexus back again in Massachusetts?
Well, we do have net metering here. We're actually more advanced than California. My job is to keep it intact, and I think we're gonna do okay. There was some momentum. Charlie Baker was a decent person in some ways, but he was a little more conservative on this stuff than I would have liked him to be. And there was a movement to take away net metering. And you guys know, again, why this is so complicated and why thinking about these issues is so worthwhile. The case against net metering, everybody knows more or less what net metering is that people in Chelmsford use it more than people in Chelsea. Or people in Lexington use it more than people in Chelsea. The folks who take advantage of net metering skew middle income and upper middle income. They own the single family homes, they're not renters. They have the money to make the upfront investment. So the argument mounted against net metering cleverly, even on the part of some reasonably moderate to liberal governors or legislators, is we can't subsidize the middle class. We've got to, at the expense of low and moderate income folks who aren't as interested. So let's assume that solar can make it on its own, that it's been launched, it's been nurtured, it's reached adolescence, you might say, or it's time to push it out of the house and make solar live on its own, subject to market conditions with no subsidies that, in effect, other people pay for. That's an argument that merits respect. My response to it is that we're way behind deploying clean energy. And it's also my response to those, and this is a more serious issue. I think we're okay for the moment in terms of net metering. Where we're in serious trouble is in subsidies for EVs. You get $3,500 off the cost of an electric vehicle in Massachusetts. You get even more, an additional $1,500 for a total of $5,000 if you're low income. But if you're middle class, if you're comfortable middle class, as a lot of folks in my district are, I give you $3,500. The Healy administration is proposing to phase out subsidies for the middle class for EVs. I mean, like, I've seen the slide deck. They want to go public with this in the next 60 days. I strongly disagree with them. We're way behind by their own count in where we need to be in terms of electric vehicles. Trump is going to try to destroy the electrification of transportation single-handedly, and Musk is letting him do it. So this would be the worst time to take away the state subsidies. We're going to lose the federal ones, which are $7,500 if the car and if the battery is made in the states. We're going to lose that. It's only been in existence for a couple of years. It was part of Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. To give away state subsidies, or I should say to give up on them, when we're having to see federal ones take away would mean that the cost to you of buying an EV, it's going to cost you $7,500 if you wish to, if they manage to take away the federal subsidies, $7,500, and then the Healy administration wants to take away the $3,500. That's an $11,000 net deficit. So on this one, I agree with Governor Healy on a lot of things. I know that she hit upon this idea at a time when she thought that Biden's subsidies would be in place. If the federal subsidy was going to be there, and if there's and if the California Clean Air Act waiver was going to force the internal combustion engine car to get cleaner every year, then they figured, what the heck? We'll save ourselves some money. We'll do away with the state subsidies for EVs. Now Trump has won instead of Kamala Harris. The $7,500 in federal subsidy is in peril. Just this week, the Trump people announced that they intend to go after California's clean air waiver, which is a complicated arrangement which essentially lets California go its own way on electrification and cleaning up transportation, and other states to follow if they wish. We've opted to do exactly that. If California loses its ability to forge a separate path, we're really stuck in terms of dealing with climate change and transportation. Terrible time to take away the $3,500. I'm sorry to be so long-winded about it, but in terms of what I do every day, it's dealing with these kinds of issues. I know we're in a parlous situation in terms of the state budget. I know that it's tempting to eyeball the money that these subsidies add up to. I think that the timing would be terrible, and I think we can. I'm not sure that we can persuade the governor to desist. It's going to be an active fight, and that's where we are. Yes.
Yes, yeah. The excise tax. Why should we not tax the size of the engine rather than the year of the car?
Wow.
Yeah.
Search me. Why? Why? You tell me.
Well, because they're bigger engines, use more fuel, and.
What do you think about a vehicle miles tax? Vehicle miles
I'd rather
travel
have the
tax.
excise tax.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because it's a lump sum, you know what it is, and it should be whatever it is.
Oh, I see.
$200 or something like
And
that.
why the size of the engine? Aren't there some big electric motors out there that would be
Well, I mean, I'm not
swept?
talking about electric, I'm just talking about.
Oh, you are.
gas-driven cars.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Or whatever.
Interesting,
Whatever
interesting.
you decide.
Okay.
Because that's how other people perceive, the excise tax. It's, if you have an older car and you just more energy, less energy, more gas.
Okay. Thank you.
It's less money.
That's you're giving me things to think about. I appreciate it. Yes. Hi.
Hi. Thank you for taking my question.
Sure.
We're gonna have to move over here, and this fellow has been holding the mic too, so.
So we know that nationwide, as well as in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, there's growing support for nuclear power. And we believe that this is something that our government, our state government, needs to look at. In particular, ISO New England has come up with several reports that say if we follow the path that has been prescribed, there's a good chance that we will have not enough energy inefficiencies, insufficiencies in the future. And we also recognize that there are benefits beyond being clean that nuclear power presents. It uses less land, less resources, and it's reliable. It's not dependent on the weather. And so we as a group, Eco Nuclear Solutions, is submitting a couple bills this time, and I hope that you will co-sponsor one of them. I'll have to look on my notes, but there's a Senate bill and a House bill that say essentially the same thing, which is we want a commission to study nuclear power in this country. In this state.
Yeah, no, I got you.
Yeah. So, we're just asking you to co-sponsor one of those bills.
If I would, maybe you could leave me a piece of paper or something so that I could carry. But I want you to know that I'm with you. Fundamentally, I think I've changed on nuclear compared to when I was a young whippersnapper. And I now reluctantly agree that nuclear is non-greenhouse gas emitting and has to be a part of the solution. Now, we are doing some serious things to help nuclear along. On this 2024 bill, maybe it was thanks in part to your advocacy, for the first time we added nuclear to the definition of renewable energy so that it can qualify under our renewable portfolio standard, which is essentially a quota that we impose on utilities to buy a certain proportion of energy that's clean. Wind and solar have constituted the definition of renewable energy, but we just added nuclear. And the reason we did that is because, well, it's complicated. Some of it's politics, some of it's policy. Connecticut has one of the 2 remaining nuclear power plants in New England, right? Millstone. Right. And Connecticut's governor, good Democrat by the name of Ned Lamont, wants another New England state to agree, at least in principle, to buy some output from the Millstone nuclear power plant. So we authorized the state. We didn't obligate the state to buy nuclear, but we authorized the state to consider it as a possibility. So and meanwhile, we're trying to encourage fusion. You're familiar with fusion as opposed to fission. Well, Commonwealth Fusion is a company that's gotten a lot of venture capital. It's in Devens, Massachusetts. They're trying to deal with power from the atom, but in a different way. It's always been about to happen, never happens. Still, Commonwealth has raised more money than any of its predecessors. So we're giving fusion some pride of place in this renewable portfolio standard quota system that I just described. So we're trying to help.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And if there's any groups that want to learn more about nuclear power, see me. I've got some information for you.
Okay. And be sure to leave me one of your sheets. I'll take a look at those bills.
Okay, I know he's had his hand raised over here for a long time. There's a lot of questions. I know we're coming back here though.
My name is Brian Campbell, and I'm a retired electrical engineer. And I worked at A123 Systems on utility-based
batteries, yeah.
I'd like to echo nuclear solutions, what Carolyn said, I think, and that we released nuclear power, big time.
In the mic.
And I feel like...
why don't you say it in the mic?
I feel like closing Pilgrim was a huge mistake for this state. And it's definitely come out right now. But I have this app, it's called Electricity Map. And I can look at the emissions of different ISO. We are ISO, it's New York ISO. And there's also Ontario, which is Independent Service Operator. On the map, it shows you can look at the total emissions of our energy. And it's right now, and for ISO New England, it's 320 grams per kilowatt hour. But in nuclear Ontario, it's 129 grams per kilowatt hour. Almost a third.
Thank you.
Of what our total emissions are. And they got rid of all their coal up in Ontario.
Good.
And they replaced it with nuclear. It's the biggest carbon reduction of this century, of the 21st century, in independent service operator.
Thank you very much.
A big speech, but I'll go on with a big speech to be it known that there's a lot of people still who don't want nuclear, have lots of reasons against it, not the least of which is cost. The most recent ones in Georgia cost $20 billion. They added $12. They added $12 a month out of the electric bills. We don't have the money, first off, and secondly, we could do it without it. That's
well. What about solar panels? What about
Because we were shut full of now, came from the Giants. See the crowd shine. So it's 50% of that.
All right, guys.
With I'm not save labor.
Please stand.
You guys are all masters.
Please do that.
Well, thank you.
That's what you are. We're
Listen,
slavers.
there's nothing wrong with the good, high-spirited discussion, so thanks.
Yeah, just.
Why don't we take one, thank you, why don't we take one more question? Yes.
Okay, let's see. Okay, thanks. Thanks for coming. My name's Caleb. I'm actually from Carlisle, and I work sort of voluntarily for, well, not volunteer. Anyway, I work for the Mosquito, which is our newspaper. I think
I'm a reader. You mail it to me. Thank you.
I think I have a layout for you that maybe you could end on. That is, I was hoping you could comment on, this might be old news, but I was hoping you could comment on your work with the sort of, with regards to the private jet, proposed private jet at Hanscom. Because and sort of the impact that the recent climate bill had with regards to that.
Thank you. That is a layup. I'm recovering a little bit from a cold, so let me. I think you guys know that Hanscom is a great. There's some water, I think. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Hanscom is a great resource. There are two operations out at Hanscom that are totally separate. There's the Air Force Base, which serves as the focus for a lot of research that Lincoln Labs and MITRE and other operations do. A lot of it fascinating, a lot of it on radar systems, communication systems. That is not controversial. But cheek by jowl with the Hanscom Air Force Base is the civilian airport operated by Massport, also the owner of Logan and of the Worcester Airport. And the civilian airport's not been around forever, but it's been around since World War II, the aftermath of World War II. It predates now what is a jewel of a national park, right? As it happens, the British, and we're about to celebrate the 250th anniversary of this happening, the British marched from Boston through Cambridge and Somerville and Arlington along a path that brought them to a conflict where people died in Lexington, and then they continued on to Concord. As fate would have it, the original route, which is now a national park, runs right by the civilian airport, separated literally by a chain link fence that might be as far from me as that wall at certain points. So you've got a civilian airport which does general aviation. General aviation means folks who fly double-engine planes on the weekend. There are lots of, you won't call them putt-putt, but a lot of conventional aircraft, small airplanes that buzz over my house on the weekend, and I don't begrudge their making the noise. You've got charters, the Boston Patriots, the Boston Celtics, and the Bruins fly in and out of Hanscom because Logan is crowded. You've got some aviation schools to train people to be pilots. There's been an equilibrium for years in this airport, and wouldn't you know it, that the pandemic, which has changed our lives in so many ways, changed the thinking of some people with respect to this rather quiet airport that has to coexist with a beautiful national park that we're still restoring every time we can buy an additional parcel along this long linear route that leads to the Old North Bridge in Concord, Massachusetts. I represent Lexington, Concord, Bedford, Carlisle, Chelmsford, Lincoln, so that I'm totally immersed in this. Well, during COVID, a strange thing happened to the very, very rich. They decided that they didn't want to spend any time in the company of other very, very rich people. So an industry grew up that Hanscom took note of, the operators of Hanscom Massport, in which private jets were the solution. If you didn't want to travel the indignity of first class on a commercial airline, if being in the company of other folks who can consistently afford first class travel exposed you to the threat of COVID, you of course could always move up in the hierarchy and buy a private jet. So developers came along and said, look, COVID's created a real demand for self-isolating at the highest level so that billionaires don't have to spend time rubbing shoulders with other billionaires. We're going to build a huge set of hangars for private jets at Hanscom. Hanscom doesn't make a lot of money for Massport, so Massport jumped at the opportunity to build out these hangars. The trouble from a climate point of view is that riding in a private jet, which I have done once in my life, I forget why. I think I actually was thrown off, a regular jet because they were overbooked, and I was given a ticket. This was about 30 years ago. It's the one time I've flown in a private jet, and I dimly remember it. And I know this, that in that one time, I was doing more to harm the climate than I have ever been able to compensate for in a year of driving an EV. Flying private jets routinely, which is what customers of this hangar development would do, is the single most destructive thing a normal person can do to the climate. If you fly on a commercial airline, as we all do to visit for any number of reasons, you're in the company of a lot of other folks, and your carbon footprint per passenger mile flown is significant but manageable. If you take a private jet, the average number of passengers in today's private jet, 4. Where do the trips go? These are not business trips to a surprising degree. We've mapped where private jets go because there are some at Hanscom already. We're trying to fight an expansion. Half the trips are to Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, the South Shore of Long Island. These are beautiful places around the world that are clearly for recreation as well as for business. So you've got very, very rich people doing the most destructive thing one can do to the climate, and it isn't even, in half the cases, for an avowed business purpose. So a number of us have been resisting this combination of plutocracy and pollution of a kind that we would never see in Massachusetts to the same extent otherwise. I decided to look at Massport's enabling statute. It's actually hard to find because it's not a part of the so-called general laws, which are published and available in the Chelmsford Public Library. This is a special law passed in 1956. Remember, a lot of this stuff happened after World War II in the 50s. I found it, but it wasn't easy, and I read it, and I realized that the only mission Massport, which owns Hanscom, has is a decent mission, is to generate prosperity and contribute to the overall economy of eastern Massachusetts. No mention of climate. So I wrote some language that said this: look, let's have a modern charter for Massport. A modern charter would acknowledge the importance that Logan plays in contributing to the eastern Massachusetts economy, but of course, it would note in equal measure that Massport should contribute to reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. Massport should be very concerned about security to make sure that its systems can't be hacked. There are a number of things that would go into a even-handed, balanced mission for Massport that had never been asked to shoulder. I wrote the language. I talked to senators and legislators in East Boston, neighbors to Logan. They were very supportive. So we managed to get it past the Senate. And then I'm very grateful to Chelmsford's legislative delegation on the House side. The House agreed with us. I think Massport was flabbergasted, but we happened to hit a good time. Massport had its CEO had left to become CEO of National Grid. actually. And they hadn't yet put the new guy in. So there was a little bit, they took their eye off the ball just a tad maybe, and this very powerful behemoth, which by reputation never suffered a loss on Beacon Hill, suddenly saw its charter completely rewritten with the requirement that greenhouse gas reduction be co-equal with the production or with the support of economic prosperity for the region. Now here's the weakness though with the language that I wrote, because I don't want to over-represent it. In the end, the board of directors for Massport has to interpret our mandate that they be mindful of the need to reduce greenhouse gases. They could choose to avoid the language and to go more or less with a narrower original mission, and they could build those hangars to house all those private jets. So I've met with the new CEO. I've told him how serious this issue is. Really, I've said, you know, you will emerge, I believe this, you will emerge as the personification of Trumpism in Massachusetts if you build these hangars. This is the single most injurious step any public agency could conceivably take. It will set us back and cancel out years of effort that many of us have put into fighting climate change. And he said, well, we had a conversation. I said, and he said, well, look, can I now talk to you about other ways in which we can partner? And I said, no. There is no other way we can partner. It's this. Believe me, you do this and you've made an enemy for life on the part of many people in Eastern Mass. They will never, ever forget this if you let this go forward. That's my message. I don't know. Here's where we are. The Healy administration, to its credit, rejected their counter arguments, you know, because they put together a case that suggested they would be good for the environment. And they have to do this because there's something called an environmental impact statement that a project of this size needs. Rebecca Tepper, the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs for Governor Healy, rejected their statements.
The time is 8:15 and the library is closing shortly at 8:30. If you have any items to check out or anything to print, fax, or scan, please do so now. Our meeting and study rooms are now closed and the public computers will shut down automatically at 8:25. Be sure to save your work before then and see the librarian at the desk if you need assistance. The library is closing in 15 minutes.
That is tough love right there. So it's back to the drawing boards. They have to come forward with another justification. I'm hopeful the Healy people will continue to reject it until they come clean and concede that this is just a net loss for us and that there's no way to make it up. But that's where we are, and I'm grateful that legislators in both branches have decided to hang tough on this. We'll see what happens. Thank you.